Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our U.S. Office 365 community call for March. Can you believe it already? Oh, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. And I see that nobody seemed to appreciate my little waiting music today, so I will kill that for next time. I thought a little crystal method might wake everybody up in the morning, but oh well. Okay, we'll keep trying. Maybe we'll try something else, or you can send me some suggestions. And so we've got a great call today. First is our welcome, of course, and we're going to talk about Secure Score today. I'm really excited to have Brandon Kaler and Stu Clark. They're both principal program managers, and they own this. So I'm really excited to have them share this today. And Secure Score has really got a great reception. We had a couple of partner briefings so far, and we've been talking about it there, and we've really gotten good reception, so I think there's a lot of great stuff. We'll have them on for most of the hour, and then we'll have time for your Q&A. And then, of course, we like to put up this community slide for those of you who may be new. I want to encourage everybody to join the Yammer group. That's where you're going to be able to find some slides for this presentation. I usually get to posting them a little bit later in the day, and you can get that at aka.ms whack join 0365 Yammer. So there's a couple thousand partners out there already, and so to use a overly used phrase, come on and join the conversation. And I also wanted to tell you about some training that's happening, and so I put this up here. There's only one date now. So if we could just move to the next slide. It's actually happening in New York, but I put it up here because we should see some additional content. I can't stress enough how excited I am about this, especially if you're interested in expanding your practice into Office 365 security components. You're going to learn all about those, and there's part technical and part sales. And the first event is coming up in New York, and you can see the registration URL there. But it's my understanding that we're working on several virtual events that will be coming up soon in the following weeks, and probably in that April-May timeframe. And so you can find that information out on Yammer. I will absolutely put that out there. So encourage you to check that out. And then now I'm going to turn things over to my friend Brandon. Brandon, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us and supporting the partner community. We're very excited to have you today.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael, for that very warm welcome. Definitely appreciate being invited, and I'm very excited to talk about the Secure Score today.
Excellent.
So with that, I will go ahead and dive in. Lots of stuff to cover today. As Michael mentioned, my name is Brandon Kaler, and I'm a program manager in Office 365 Security, and I've been working on the Secure Score for it's about 18 months now. I'm going to mostly spend time not in a PowerPoint deck, but instead in the application and demoing a variety of features. My colleague Stu is on the call monitoring your questions, so please ask questions in the Event Builder chat, and we'll police those up. He'll answer them as we go, and then we'll answer common questions at the very end. All right, so this whole thing started with a series of customer questions where essentially every conversation we had with customers was around where do I go to do security stuff? There's a bunch of different applications: the Admin Center, the Security and Compliance Center, the Exchange Admin Center, the SharePoint Admin Center, the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. There's a bunch of different places where you can go and do administrative sorts of things. And we realized very quickly that the silos of our application ecosystem also siloed a lot of the security features for those. But in most cases, security administrators inside of companies and for partners, they cross those workload boundaries. Like, you're the security guy, not just for Exchange or not just for SharePoint, but for all of it. And so we thought we had an opportunity here. And we thought, well, what if we put all the cloud security controls in one place with a game attached to it, basically a score-based framework to determine what the highest impact actions are and a very easy way for them to do them. And so that's where the idea of the Secure Score sort of came from. So the idea here is that we put insights into your security posture in one place. So we took about 70 different, I'll call them controls, but what they are is really security recommendations, and they span a bunch of different things. I'll talk about the entity model in the schema here in just a little bit. Basically, we just inventoried everything, and then based on interactions with customers and an analysis of support escalations to Microsoft from customers to sort of understand how they were being breached. We essentially just assigned scores based on the efficacy of any given control to address a specific risk. And when we did that, we then went in the back end and figured out which customers were doing which particular things, added up their scores, and presented it. And then, so this basically is a summary view of this. This is probably easier to do in the context of the actual application. A key aspect of this is we want you to be able to take action. So not just learning about what your score is and understanding what things you've adopted or not adopted, but to simplify the act of actually adopting any given security feature. We found that the cost of adoption was very, very high among a lot of our customers. They had to go through these extensive planning exercises where they would have to, 3 months from now we're going to enable 3 people and see how it goes for 3 months and so on and so forth. And we wanted to lower the bar in terms of effort to turn on things that have typically been fairly complicated to do. So we have this sort of what we call 2-click remediation experience that exists throughout the thing. And when you do that, you essentially get this very simple explanation of how all this stuff works. We also exposed a reporting tool. One of the key elements of this is to enable security administrators to take credit for improvements in their security. The sort of succeeding at security is often an issue with, well, we didn't get breached, so nice job, pat yourself on the back. And what we wanted to do was engage security administrators so that they have incentives to engage continuously in their security posture and in taking action to improve their score, and then being able to take credit for it. Regardless of whether there was a breach or not, we felt like incremental progress over time was more valuable than waiting until you had a breach and then freaking out and then doing way more than you really needed to do. Of course, the score deviates in some respect from sort of traditional models in that it doesn't categorize findings into sort of high, medium, and low. It just has a number. And so the idea here is, hang on, I'm going to turn this off. This is super annoying. There's timings in the deck. You guys know how this goes. Let's see, slideshow, use timings. All right, now we're back in business. So the traditional security analysis model typically will say, oh, this is a critical finding and this is a moderate finding, this is a low finding. And we found that what that meant was people just did the bare minimum, the things that are critical, and they basically didn't do the other things. And what it meant was that if we asserted that a thing was critical and a customer couldn't do it for usually fairly good reasons, the tool was typically dismissed as being not very valuable because it didn't take the idiosyncrasies of any given customer into account. And so the framework here makes it so that we don't care which thing you do, as long as the sum of things that you're doing adds up to some sort of incremental progress over time, and that was more valuable than having some sort of like tiered alerts or some sort of urgent type of thing. So the tool is designed to be a kind of easy thing that you do when you have a few minutes and you do it on a regular basis. So it's not a reaction or response tool. It's meant to be a proactive tool. Okay, so let's get into demo. So you can get to the Secure Score by going to securescore.office.com, and I'm pleased to report that the Score experience is available to all Office 365 customers, and with a handful of exceptions, but for the most part, if you're in the multi-tenant service, we're calculating the score for you in the back end every night. The experience itself, like I said, it's pretty simple. I'm going to sort of walk through it here in a second, but it is designed to be something that you can revisit on some sort of regular basis. It's also designed to be fairly private, right? It's not something that you are necessarily going to want to expose to external people. All right, so when you come to this experience, you start out on the dashboard, and there's a few widgets here on the page. The first one you see is your score summary, and this is kind of your rolled-up snapshot summary of what your secure score is. It tells you the date of the last calculation of your secure score and the time in local time that the score was actually calculated. The score consists of two numbers. There's a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is basically the sum of the controls that you fully or partially meet. That's full stop. That's all it is. So there's 70 controls, and you meet 10 of them. The sum of the score that's assigned to those 10, we just add them up, and boom, you get your secure score. The denominator represents the sum of the points for every control that is available to you. Some of the controls that you have purchased. So in this particular case, this tenant is an E3 tenant. So I have things like data loss prevention and auditing and things like that, as well as SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, and Skype for Business. And so the experience is inclusive of those things. If I am an E1 customer and I haven't bought Skype for Business or SharePoint or any of that other stuff, my denominator will be lower, right? So I won't be exposed to the controls for features that I haven't bought, right? So we wanted to make it as sort of tight and simple as we could make it, given what your investment in Office 365 is currently. Okay, so that's this. There's a little widget here in the upper right, which sort of highlights what's new, and we update this whenever we do a deployment. We're updating the experience, I don't know, probably every couple of weeks, every month at the latest, and we'll basically highlight what's new here. So encouraging people to sort of come back and assess that. That's also dismissible. There's also up here, we wanted to make very clear that while this is a super fun game, that you can sort of improve your score over time, and that's a great achievement, that really what you're doing is mitigating risks. And throughout the experience, you'll see the threats sort of highlighted, both in the actions as well as in these summary things. And in there, we help customers understand exactly what this risk is. We sort of explain a scenario of how it can happen and what the implications are for their particular tenancy. There's about 11 of these threats. We've tried to kind of group them and categorize them into sort of grokkable, like a smaller scope, so that they're or slightly larger scope, so they're not so fine-grained. But you'll see those throughout. So it's an important thing for a security administrator to understand. When they're taking action, they're actually taking action to prevent specific types of attacks from occurring in their tenancy. All right. So below the risk assessment, there is a score comparison, and this is very, very simple. This is your score versus the average of all Office 365 customers. So this score started out last August at 15, and it's gone up to 20, and my hope is that we continue that velocity. This, in my mind, represents the base customer security level in Office 365. Now, the vast majority of our customers are actually fairly small seat customers, often facilitated by partners such as yourself, and their scores are typically fairly low. They are usually not super sophisticated and demanding about security features necessarily, and they typically don't proactively take action in this, which is why this is low. So a lot of this experience is targeted at improving their particular adoption to make this number go up. We do have a couple of features in our backlog to add additional dimensions. We've got a fair amount of feedback that folks would love to see the average score for people of the same seat size as this particular tenant, as well as people in the same industry. So the seat size one's a little easier. Getting industry data for the millions of customers we have on the platform is a little bit more challenging, but we're doing our best to sort of add that. There is, throughout the experience, help text in here. So when you click to learn more, it will tell you what we mean by calculating the Office 365 average. Down here on the lower right, there is a get advice. So the experience will basically take you to the Office Network group for security, where the security administrator can ask questions, either about the Secure Score experience or about specific security recommendations. So there is help in line. There's also a feedback widget down here, and Stu and I and a whole host of other people actually get all this directly, and we respond to every single bit of it. So if you or your customers have some feedback for us, we definitely encourage you to provide it, because we will check it out and use it to make the experience better. All right, so now we're to the heart and soul of the whole experience. We call this the action modeler, and this is basically where any given customer can take action to improve their score. Now, there's a couple pieces of complexity here. You'll see that there's actions in a queue down here, right? So it's got about 25 actions in this queue, or 26. It tells me what my current score is here on the left and what my max score could be. And then given the actions that I have in the queue down here, these 26 actions, this is what my score would be. Now, you might notice and be confused by the fact that this number is bigger than the denominator. So this says a target score of 343, but in theory I could have a max of 273. And what's this over here? 440 is my theoretical max. So where this difference comes in is that the action queue is inclusive of features that you have not purchased. So there is a series of what we call advanced controls, and these are basically the premium features. So advanced security management, the advanced threat protection features, Azure Active Directory, the premium Azure Active Directory features, the privileged identity management, and so forth. Those are all contained in there, and there's not a crazy amount of points in there, but a substantial. And so what you see here is basically what your score could be if you did literally everything that's in this list below. So the operation here is pretty simple. This is basically just a slider that you slide around. You'll note here that we've got a little description. One of the tendencies that we want to counterbalance in the experience is that security administrators prioritize security over many other things. They and for very good reasons. They believe that security is a very important part, and often to the detriment of productivity. And so what we wanted to do is to give administrators some feedback that there are a certain set of things that we consider high value, low user impact. This is a great start. This is basics, right? At some point, though, you tip over from basic to balanced, and the feedback here is, okay, you've got a lot of actions in your queue. Now you're starting to tick over into things that include what we consider defense in depth choices, which is to say you're now starting to negatively impact some of the usability of your end users. And so you sort of move through these defense in depth choices, and at some point now the actions include things that add marginal risk mitigation with moderate or high user impact. So what we didn't want is for somebody to come in here and be like, okay, sweet, I'm going to get the maximum score of 440. I am going to do all 51 actions that I don't have here, and away I go. We very much wanted to have customers understand that a perfect score certainly doesn't mean that perfect security, and it likely means that your users are not going to be super happy. Instead, what you should focus on is incremental improvements in your particular score. Wherever you're at is fine. What you should try to do is to just get a little bit better yourself versus trying to achieve every possible thing that's available in the experience. All right, so this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about the actions in the queue here. You'll note here that the slider actually just pops and adds items to the queue, right? So when I move it from 4 to 5, you see enable mailbox auditing for all users just gets added. And where that comes from is our secure score control list. And this is actually available in the experience. I'll show you guys how to do that here in a little bit. I'm just going to add this thing as one of these, and I'm going to stack rank lowest to highest. So this is a listing of all the controls. This is literally an export of the data model that sits behind the whole experience. We make this available to all the customers. Even if they don't want to use the experience, they still have the control set as a baseline that they can go do whatever it is they need to do. This includes descriptions. It includes the remediation text that's in the experience. And most importantly, includes the action URL where you can actually go take the action that we're recommending in the experience. You'll note here that we have a stack rank, and this is a key simplification that we opted for. I mentioned earlier that the experience action list actually shows you basic, balanced, and aggressive. And essentially what that breaks down to is a tiering that we applied. So when we went and inventoried all of the controls that exist across all of the features in Office 365, we added a bunch of sort of metadata about them. We figured out if it was a configuration, if it was a review of data experience, or if it was a behavioral control. So there's a control type that's associated with that. That's all over here. We added an action category, which is to say this particular control applies to accounts, data, or devices. Those are the 3 core entities that are included in here. And then we added which workload that particular control lives in. And then we had this tiering. This tiering there's 3 tiers: core tier, defense in depth, and advanced. As I mentioned earlier, the advanced are basically premium features that you have to pay for. You'll note that those are all stack ranked to the bottom of the list. And the reason for that is that we wanted our customers to get the most value out of what they've already purchased before we started sort of inviting them to spend more money to make themselves more secure. So the controls are there. They can explore them. They get a very clear sense of what the point values are for those particular controls, but they're at the bottom of the list because we feel like there's plenty of value to be extracted from the stuff that they've already purchased. Excuse me. So in core, you'll note that for the most part, user impact here is low, as well as the implementation cost. When you get into the defense in depth, you'll note that these controls now start having a lot more moderate user impact. There are still some that are low, but in most cases that low also means that it has relatively low mitigation value. So between the user impact implementation cost and our assessment of how valuable or how effective that particular control was, this is the baseline basically represents the points that we've assigned to that particular control. And you'll see that they basically start high and they go low in a tier. And then when you tick over to the next tier, they start high and they go low to get the bottom of that tier. And then, just start all over again, right? So we did that exercise, and then we essentially applied a stack ranking. So we basically said, in all cases, if a customer has not done admin MFA, multi-factor authentication, enabled it for their administrators, that's the first thing that they should do. They can opt not to do it, right? But it's always going to be the top thing in their list. Based on our experience of all the threats and breaches that have happened out in the wild, we know that a breach of admin MFA is very, very, very bad for customers, and it is in most cases the the thing that attackers go after. It's like literally the number one thing. 90% of customer breaches are phishing, and of that 90% are an attempt to get access to some sort of administrative account. So it is the target for the most part, and then it sort of goes down from there. So this is, of course, available in the experience, so you can download this and evaluate it. We are always happy to take feedback about the score, the user impact, where it should sit in the stack rank, and so forth. It's not terribly hard for us to change the order or update any of this stuff, and we're always happy to have a data-driven discussion if you feel like we're missing something or you feel like we've got it wrong. So we acknowledge that we might have it wrong, if you will. All right, so that's the guts behind it. The modeler here basically allows you to set yourself up for a kind of doable set of actions, right? So if you come in here and you're like, look, I got lots of time, I'm going to do 20 actions, this is going to be so great. You can just sort of wind your way through these. I will say that the filtering here is against those categories that I just talked about. So you can say, just show me account, data, device, this low and moderate user impact and implementation cost, and then the control types that are down here. So if you were to say, look, I'm only going to do things that the users aren't going to notice, when I apply that filter to the queue and then increase that, you'll see that the max score and the number of actions that can appear in my queue are filtered based on that particular thing. So you can adjust your action plan, if you will, given certain types of constraints. So the next thing that we typically poke at here, for any given control, these are labeled. Designate less than 5 global admins is the name of this control. We have a very clear explanation of what it is that we want you to do. We want you to have less than 5 global tenant administrators, because the more you have, the more likely that it is that one of them will be breached. And then we have an as-observed value here. So we found that in this particular tenancy, I have 16 global admins. So I actually don't get this point. And this is basically saying if I designate less than 5 admins, but more than 2, which is another control here, have more than 1 global admin, that your score will go up by 1 point. So you can see these are the annotations that we just showed you in the spreadsheet. It tells me what my score will be if I do it. These are the threats that I was mentioning earlier. These are sort of, pasted throughout. So customers will be like, well, if I do this, what am I doing? Oh, I'm addressing account breach, elevation of privilege, and malicious insider. When you click Learn More, it brings up this custom remediation pane. And what it does is it tells you exactly what you're about to change and how it's going to affect your end users. And in this particular case, we've optimized the experience to basically be much simpler than it would be otherwise. So in this particular case, I'm going to take these are all. I got to find somebody. That's me. Let's go with this person, security administrator. So it's just you change the role that you want this person to do. You can do multiple ones at the same time, and then you click Apply. So you literally are managing your role assignments in what amounts to a 2 or 3 click experience. And when it's completed, you get basically a success thing, and you get a way to inform the users about that action. When you click that, I think my email, this brings up an email. So this is this particular user will get this email, and you can say, hey, heads up, I just demoted you, so don't freak out. Changing roles in the admin center is much more difficult, where you have to find the user, edit the role, pick the role, et cetera, commit it, and it's on a per user basis. You can't do them sort of all at once, and so that we found was a lot of friction for somebody to sort of manage it. And this everywhere where we could, we have tried to make it a 2-click experience. Okay, so that's the action modeler and the sort of main page of the Secure Score. I'm going to talk about the Score Analyzer here a little bit, and this is essentially where you get to take credit for all of the awesome work that you're doing. So the Score Analyzer page has basically 3 sections in it. There is your Secure Score over time, And this is a dynamic graph. This is basically showing you what your score was for the last collect time, which was February 28th, was a 95 out of 20. If I go back here and click this dot, I see my score on this day was 111 out of 273. So you can also see that on that same day, the O365 average was also 20. You can change the filter here to be last 7 days or last 30 days or last 3 months, which is what the default is, as well as a custom reporting period. At the moment, the data retention in the experience, I think, is 90 days, although our expectation is that we'll retain basically a year's worth of data. Also note here the export button. So the export button allows you to take the data that's contained on this particular page and make it movable. So you can basically email it to other people. If there's a non-administrator in your experience, you can, basically export. There's a PDF here that you can click and give it a sec to render. Maybe Chrome's going to do it. Maybe it's not. Let's go back here while I'll do that. You can also download a CSV of your action list. That's coming down here. Open that guy. So you can see here, basically it tells you the controls. The controls that you've got, the description of that particular control, the action category, what your score was, and then whether you completed it. So you can say, oh, just show me the things that I have not completed, and show me the things that I have completed. And you can see here that, this is for this particular day, sum of 81, and so forth. PDF does more or less the same thing, but just in PDF form. Oh, there it is. It finally came up. This is non-editable. In addition to that, there is the control list. So the CSV control list. So the action list represents what you have done and your particular achievement of points or non-achievement of points. The control list is basically just a static list of what the recommendation baseline is. And that was this spreadsheet that we were just going over. That is, the control list is this. I literally downloaded it, and it downloads a secure score control list, and away you go. So for any given day that you pick, I'm going to pick the February 28th here, 95 of 273. It will tell you what your discrete score achievement was out of the possible ones for that particular entity dimension. So account, data, and device are the core entities that you're trying to secure, and it will tell you that you have done 6 out of a possible 17 actions, or out of 31, or out of 13 in this particular case, and what the potential points are in each of these. So this kind of gives you a sense, oh, man, I'm not doing anything around devices. Maybe I should go in and look at kind of what's going on in device land to improve my score there, because I just don't have any coverage on that particular dimension. At the bottom is a list of all the completed actions as well as incompleted actions, and this experience is rendered such that you can go back in and do it all over again. So for completed actions, you can, in this particular case, this is showing me these are the global admins that do not have MFA enabled, and that if I do this particular thing, these are who will have MFA enabled. You notice there's an inform users about this action. In this particular case, I have an incomplete score. I only got 6 out of 50. And so this is an opportunity for me to, from here, improve my score. And the incomplete actions is essentially the same list that appears on the action modeler on the other page, except there's no modeler piece where you can reduce this list. It's essentially like an auditing inventory. These are, all the policies that are available that I have not fully completed. In addition to that, you've got the standard filtering controls that apply here in both cases. Okay, so a couple other things here. I got about 10 or 15 more minutes. I wanted to, I'm going to talk about the API here in a second, but before we get to that, I wanted to highlight a couple of things here that we discovered. In the early days, it was sort of up in the air as to whether or not this actually worked. And so we examine the data for the set of customers that actually visited the experience in the preview, which started last August and ran through basically February 10th of this year. And we looked at them and said, did their scores go up? Just a very basic set of questions, and a couple other things. What we found is that the secure score results in an approximately 20% increase in score for those that visit versus those that don't. At least for smaller customers. The people that visited are enterprise heavy, but a reasonable distribution. For the most part, the visitors to the secure score were security conscious, which is to say that their average scores were higher than the average, right? So in the overall score movement, a typical Office 365 tenant started out at 15, and the visitors would start out at more like 30, 36 or 35 or so. And over the course of time, what we saw is that the average scores for those particular customers went up. What we basically concluded from that is that regardless of seat size, regardless of security consciousness or whatever, everybody got an improvement in their score. We essentially took that to mean that putting it all in one place, assigning a score to it, and making it very easy to take action means that they do those things, right? That it's not overly confusing and so forth. So I'll talk about this in a second, or demo some of the pieces. The most common set of questions we get is about roadmap. What's coming next? And the top thing on our list is about getting more controls scored and more end-to-end remediations. I don't know if you guys noticed this. The sharp-eyed ones among you probably noticed this, but all of these controls, some of them have this label on them that says not scored, and this can be confusing for folks. Essentially what this is a control that we want to recommend. It's a feature that's available in the service, but Microsoft has not figured out, Stu and I, have not figured out exactly where that data lives in the back end. So the ecosystem is incredibly complicated. These applications, they live in a bunch of different places, and going and getting data about all customers from each of those particular feature sets is a challenge. So 70 controls, I'd say we've got somewhere over 40 of them instrumented, and we're always pushing to get more instrumentation. So that's a priority for us to flip a lot of these controls from not scored to scored. And then the other thing is to, for many of these, like MFA is a really good example here, we don't have the ability to actually enable MFA from here. We actually have to take you to another management interface in order to do that. And a lot of that just has to do with changes in the service that are coming, like MFA is in progress, or the Azure AD team is in progress on making MFA a policy-based enablement versus a per-user-based enablement. So you might say, all my global administrators will have MFA, so you're not having to figure out who your global administrators are and then enabling MFA for them on a per-user basis. When they land that, we will have access to their APIs in the back end, and we'll be able to do things like single-click remediations for those particular scenarios. In the interim, we provide links and allow people to sort of go off and do whatever. So making more of these remediation experiences be two-click is also on our backlog. The other things that we want to do, API access to the data, as it turns out, we have recently landed that, and I'll demo that here in 1 second. But other things that we want to do, we have very consistently gotten feedback from folks that there are some of these controls that they will never use, or that they will never do. Like SPO sites with classification policies. This allows you to basically say, this data is high business impact or moderate business impact or whatever, and that allows you to do a lot of interesting things with data loss prevention and so on and so forth. Very recommended to ensure that you're not going to lose that data through exfiltration or through spillage or whatever, because you now have a handle that you can use to leverage other security policies. There are some customers that are like, we're never going to do that. I don't even want to have this as part of my score. So what we're going to do here is we'll add a button that says ignore this, like remove from my list, the ability to sort of add an annotation, and this score will be removed from your particular calculation. We will expose it in the score analyzer in basically a third tab here. So it'll be completed actions, incomplete actions, and ignored actions. But that's something that we want to be able to do. We also want to be able to do things like enable customers to take credit for controls that are recommended that come from their ecosystem. Right? MFA is a really good example of this. There's a lot of customers that use different types of MFA, like they'll host it on-prem or some other sort of thing. So they actually have MFA for all their global administrators, but they aren't using ours. And we try to be smart about a lot of these. So MFA is a really good example of this. If you have a federated domain, which is to say you do all the authentication on-prem and you have MFA, you have to register that with Azure Active Directory. It's a federated domain registration. If you register that domain and indicate in the configuration that that federated domain supports MFA, when we do our calculation in the back end, we look at a user and we say, oh, they're in this domain, and it's a federated domain, and that domain supports MFA, we assume that you are leveraging MFA, and we give you credit for that, right? So that's a case where we can't actually reach in and touch your on-prem MFA implementation, but we can infer that you're doing the right thing there because you've registered a federated domain and indicated to us that it supports MFA, and you are likely using it. But in some cases, that's not possible, or using some other way. So we want to give customers essentially a way to say we're meeting this particular control with the third party, and what essentially we'll do is give you immediate credit for it, and log that essentially as a third party fulfilled control, and so forth. So these ideas, by the way, all came from customers. We've gotten a lot of engagement and feedback from not only customers but also partners, and we would love to have you keep feeding us those ideas so we can make these. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys the API now. This API, I feel like, is an important scenario, especially for partners. If you have a lot of customers that you're actually managing, of course, you can always just log into the Score experience at securescoreops.com as a delegated admin and be able to do all the things that you would do for a given customer, right? If you have so many sub-customers that you can't actually log in and do this on a one-off basis, we've exposed all the score data in an API. And it's a very simple API. It's literally a single REST method. We have a blog post. There's actually a blog, which I highly recommend all of you guys go to and follow. It's got a bunch of great security related blog posts in here about how to fix the hacked account, how to use activity data to enable a cybersecurity stance, which is about the activity API, mitigating phishing attacks, dealing with ransomware. This is basically manual illicit activity detection, where we basically go through all of the different security reports that exist in the service. And if you want to find breached accounts, go to this report, look for this particular type of thing and how often you should review it. And then there's, of course, a Secure Score review and an article in here about the Secure Score API. And the Secure Score API, like as I mentioned, is a very simple single REST method. You can integrate the data with something as simple as a PowerShell script, which I'll show you guys in a second. It requires that you register an application ID in Azure Active Directory. So if you have any kind of a tenant, this is fairly straightforward. We walk you through all the steps to do that particular thing. And then you have to grant consent for your application to read a particular customer's API, and that's done. You basically create this URL, you put a client ID and a redirect URL in there, click it, log in, and grant consent for your app to get that, and then you're able to actually request data from the API on behalf of that particular customer. You have to have a single claim, reports.readall from the Graph API, which is where we're integrated, graph.microsoft.com. And it takes basically one parameter, which is a period parameter here, which essentially is a integer value between 1 and 90, showing the number of historical days that you want to query from today's date. And then it returns basically a very simple JSON blob. It'll show you the number of licensed users and active users in the tenancy, what their score is, what the organization's max score, basically their numerator denominator, and then which services they have enabled, and then all the as observed values. So for something like admin MFA in this particular case, we had a score of 21 on this day out of a total of 50, and it's because we had 9 administrators out of a total of 16 that did not have MFA enabled, and so on and so forth. So this actually links to 2 different models here. I'm going to show you guys the what I think is the simpler one, which is the service-to-service one. This is what you would do if you're building a consumer application, or an application that's going to consume this data that you don't want to have to log into. Right? The other one, which is the ADAL model, basically you have to type in your credentials in order to facilitate the authorization to get a particular customer's call. This one, basically you register the app. It has a secret that's included in it, and that secret is what is used to facilitate the acquisition of the token from Azure Active Directory. And you can see here the script is super simple, and essentially what I've done here is you have a script, get secure score API dash service to service. There's a little config file that contains basically my app ID, my app secret, the tenant GUID and domain that I want to call. And then you basically just do a invoke REST method, get me an OAuth token. Here's my header params, and then invoke the REST method, say, go get my secure score for this particular customer, and it returns it in a results file. And when you do that, it takes, like 1 second here. And in this case, I've returned 9 days worth of stuff. I think it's actually included results here, and then you can do you can actually parse out results dot control scores. Yeah, knowledge results. Control scores. Is that going to return anything? Yes, it does. Okay. So the sub JSON blob in here that gets returned allows you to basically see for each of those days what the control scores results were for everything that's in the service. So yeah, very helpful. And the idea here is that you can build a management application, or if you already have like a partner management dashboard, that you can very quickly basically acquire secure score data and expose it in your management interfaces. So even if you just wanted to consume this high level, your secure score is 95 out of 273 for those particular customers, this is essentially a trivial implementation. Okay, let's see. We got about 10 minutes left, and I'm all out of slides, and I've talked about all the stuffs. So I think we'll take 5 minutes here and take some questions. Stu, you got some questions for me from the audience?
Stu's been knocking them down.
Nice.
In the background, so appreciate that. So while more come in, please feel free to ask some more. I just want to say this is just great, Brandon. I like to consider myself, informed when it comes to Office 365 and working with it a long time, and I was surprised when I leveraged Secure Score to even just the discovery aspect of just discovering those features available to me, and some that I just assumed were on by default, right? And even though you may have an E3 or particularly an E5, sometimes you just assume that these things are enabled and they're not. And so this was just a great tool to just really bring that visibility. Yeah.
Yeah, that is We've been surprised by the number of scenarios that this sort of a security sort of analytical service actually solves. We went into it basically wanting to connect with non-professional security administrators, people that, they're smaller, mid-sized businesses. They, often are partner managed, and they have some accountabilities around security, but they don't necessarily know what the hell they're doing. They definitely feel a strong sense of responsibility. They want to do the right thing. We haven't made it especially easy for them to discover and basically create a grokkable action plan. So we really designed the experience to sort of target them. But what we found was that two additional constituencies were very interested in having what amounted to an objective measurement of as observed states that are related to securing the service. The first was compliance auditors and regulators. One of the features that we're looking to land in the experience is essentially annotating all of the controls down here and mapping them essentially to audit standards, right? So you can imagine the enable mailbox auditing is, relevant for a whole host of things. And we would have like a PCI and a HIPAA and ISO or something like that, just those flags attached to that. They were very interested in using this sort of framework to drive better adoption and better management of those states over time, so that a regulator and a customer could say, I will, use the secure score essentially as a way to maintain my PCI compliance standards, because it very clearly annotates these are the things that are relevant to that. The other one was a cybersecurity insurance providers. It's a very unusual industry that is really starting to take off, especially given how common breaches are in this day and age. Essentially, the cybersecurity insurance folks use breach data from public records. Sometimes they'll use FOIA requests or something like that to basically come up with actuarial tables to determine what your risk is, but it's never very contextualized. It doesn't take into account what a customer is doing to reduce their risk, right? So it's difficult to look at any given customer and say, well, what's your driving record like? All I can see is that you're, a 22-year-old male in a red Mustang, and that sounds, pretty bad. So we're going to charge you a lot. What the Secure Score allows the cybersecurity insurance provider to do is to say, look, if your score is above a certain number, we're going to give you a discount on your premiums, or we're going to extend your coverage to basically give you more coverage because you're such a good driver, if you will. There's also some scenarios like third-party vendor qualification, where if you're a company like Microsoft, which has a lot of third-party vendors that we hire to do different things for us, those are fairly big risks. Like we have no idea how they run their IT. We don't really know like what they're doing to prevent breaches, or if they've already been breached and so forth. And if they're on the Secure Score platform, or if they're on the Office 365 platform, they have a Secure Score, and we could just basically ask them, what's your Secure Score, right? If it's 20, we can say things like, we would love to hire you, but we would like your score to be a little bit higher than what it is. So those were all a fairly big surprise. Okay.
This is it's just a great tool for partners. So thanks you guys for opening that up to the other administrative roles. That's just great news, and partners can use this as part of a all-up security assessment. This, along with ASM, just great information, gives really prescriptive guidance, and you can help with that remediation. And I love the score analyzer if you're doing some kind of monitoring over time, especially with that export, right? You can have that discussion with the customer and be able to monitor that over time and show that progress about how you're reducing their risk to prevent these breaches. So I just think it's a great tool. Thanks so much for sharing it today. It looks like Stu keeps knocking down those questions. I did have one. So I noticed sometimes that there's kind of drift in my score. Can you maybe just address that in just the last minute that we have?
Yeah, no, totally. The longer that we've sort of let this thing bake, we've found two potential issues. Like you can see here, my score has gone up and down, and there are two core reasons for that. One reason is bugs. Just straight up, the data telemetry that we're consuming comes from literally 70 different places, and keeping our hands around the throat of all 70 of those particular telemetry streams is a challenge. And sometimes they miss a day, or the dev team who is unaware that we're consuming the data for whatever reason, doesn't have it included in their stream per day, or the uploaders from the infrastructure, crash for whatever reason. So there's some churn that's around the quality of particular data streams, and we actively work to fix those all the time, and in some cases to just deprecate the control. If it's a fairly low value control and we can't get good telemetry, we'll deprecate it, and basically go to that team and say, we would love to push people to use your feature and make it a recommendation, but we need better telemetry to make that happen. So that's the first one. The second one is essentially about the changes in your particular tenancy, and the one where we see the most churn is around this MFA for global admins. It is a big mover. It's 50 points. It's far and away the biggest score point that we sort of award in the experience, and it's unusual in that we basically give you partial credit depending on the number of users that you have enabled, because every single user that you require to use MFA will have an effective security mitigation, and it legitimately improves your security. But as your tenancy grows, as you add global administrators, you'll find that your score goes down because you don't necessarily have a process to not only add them as global admins, but to also enable MFA for them. So in my particular case, 100% of this churn is about me adding global administrators and not requiring MFA of them. So the other one is the number of administrators. It's the non-administrator role. It's not a very big control. It's like one point, but that's mostly where that comes from. So some of these controls are like set it and forget it, right? I turn it on and it does its thing. But some of these are, as your organization grows and has some level of churn or whatever, your score will have a little bit of that churn.
Good, thanks for that, and so good to continue to keep an eye on that over time. And well, that just brings us to the end. Looks like, Stu, thanks so much for knocking down all those questions. And by the way, you can't see it right now, Brandon, but there's lots of folks that are chiming in and saying that this was great content and a great call, and they really appreciate it. So
cool. Thanks
very much. And we'll go ahead and close this out now. And if there are more questions, feel free to post them on Yammer, and look for the deck a little bit later in the day. And then there'll also be a recording of this that will be up probably in an hour or two. So thank you so much for joining for March, and we look forward to see you next month. And for those of you who provided feedback on some of the poll questions, thank you very much. We do read all of that. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you, Friday's coming up soon, so have a good weekend as well. Take care.